right, so we've got Jon Allen.
Yes, sir.
Not John Steele. From Game7. Correct?
Yep.
All right, so Jon, introduce yourself. Tell us where you're. You don't have to tell us where you're from, but if you can, if you like.
Yeah.
There are no stalkers on this show. And tell us about your background, how you got into this space, and why Game7 exists and what it is.
Yeah, so my name is Jon Allen, core contributor to Game7.
Okay.
Bit of an eclectic background. Don't know how far around the rabbit hole you want to
That's
go.
That's always fun.
Yeah.
We've got the poker players, the bank robbers. Let's
I was actually I was in the military for 5 years. I did explosive ordnance disposal.
Wow.
So it was like Army bomb squad.
Wow.
After my last deployment, I always say bombs got a little bit boring, so pivoted out, and then I found blockchain.
Nice.
So this is 2013, kind of the whole Gox incident happened, so it was a little bit more in the news, and read the white paper, and like in that 9 pages was just encapsulated like so much coolness.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to get involved in the community, and like for me, I think I was a little bit disillusioned, after deploying and kind of seeing a lot of this stuff, and then this whole community was like, we can build everything better, we can change the world, like everything could be more aligned, and like very pie in the sky idealistic, but it was super infectious.
Nice.
The people were just thinking that way, right? And even just like trying to figure out what we could do in that regard. And so I was just down the rabbit hole, 24/7 obsessed. I would be up all night on Whale called TeamSpeak, trying to learn as much as I possibly could.
Wow.
Then a couple of years later, started at UC Berkeley, co-founded blockchain at Berkeley.
Nice.
Ended up doing consulting projects for like Airbus, Qualcomm, kind of like BMW. Realized that they're interested, paid pretty well, but kind of slow to move. And so it was like, hey, we're in the Bay Area, let's do startups. And then 2017, ICO boom kicked off, and it was super timely. Worked with around 40 different ICOs.
Wow.
Realized that we were providing a lot of value that funds couldn't, because they didn't necessarily understand the tech.
Right.
And couldn't really get their hands dirty. And so we ended up, me and 2 other folks from blockchain at Berkeley, ended up flying around to 6 countries, raising 25 million, starting Decrypt Capital.
Wow.
Then we co-founded San Francisco Blockchain Week, the Crypto Economic Security Conference, I've just been passionate about kind of like investing, building communities, like kind of that trifecta is really where I like to live.
That's amazing.
So now I still kind of do the same thing, and met a couple of people who were like very passionate about gaming, which I previously met through kind of like all my different endeavors, and we were like, hey, let's do this gaming acceleration entity. We think a DAO is really well suited to kind of like help push along this next iteration of gaming. And
nice.
So that's how Game7 came
Wow,
about.
holy shit. So wait a minute. So Bomb Squad, does Bomb Squad stress management apply to investor DAO stress management?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a couple parallels, right? Like the motto for EOD is initial success or total failure. You don't necessarily get 2 chances to do this, right?
No do-overs.
It's kind of funny because crypto is all about adversarial environments, right? It's
Right.
assuming that you're in an adversarial environment, and you have to build in that kind of mentality. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of that carries over.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I also think, it just obviously helps for some of the stressors, right?
That's
you kind of like learn how to
crazy
balance
path,
things.
dude.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bomb Squad stuff is unique enough, but even your path after that, into this world, was really kind of crazy. That's amazing.
Yeah, really right time, right place.
That's rockstar stuff. I mean, all the blockchain at Berkeley, and then because I remember like seeing panels of a couple of lawyers. I want to say like Josh Glazer was on there a few times, and she was active in it, and I think Lewis Cohen was active a couple times in there. Attorneys that we know, and then I remember like Pantera was going strong then with all the ICOs.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's what I love about these interviews, because I didn't think that all of a sudden you hit on something that we all resonate with right away.
Absolutely.
That's super cool, man.
Yeah.
All right, so out of all of that experience, are you still actively involved on the investing side besides Game7 as well?
Yeah, so I'm currently managing partner at Marana Ventures.
Nice.
So still active on that front, but then, like I mentioned, I like to just summon kind of a product we're incubating at Game7. So it's like it kind of like scratches that itch for the like more founder kind of builder mentality, and then also EduDAO and Game7 I'm quite involved in.
Wow.
But Game7 is probably the biggest lift, the biggest community, the thing I'm like most excited about.
Nice. All right, so tell us Game7. Tell us kind of the origin, why, how, all of that stuff.
Yeah, so like the origin was I've always been like really passionate about gaming, a little too passionate. I don't actually game because I don't like casually do things. I tend to just go down the rabbit hole.
Wait, you don't actually game to prevent yourself from being too much in games, or you just don't actually game?
No, I don't game anymore. I watch streams a decent
Wow.
amount because it's like I played World of Warcraft for a year, and I had like 6 months time played, so it was like I was playing like 12 hours a day, like right after high
Holy
school.
shit.
And then like played League of Legends when I was transitioning out of the military. Then like got to Diamond 5 in like 6 months, and it was like, and I was like, what am I doing? So I like watching streams. I appreciate games. I'm super passionate about games, but I also like want to build things. And want to do things. So,
that's cool.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of my friends are like avid gamers. They're also, I know a lot of people in the Web3 space, and I think there's like an interesting intersection between those two. Like a lot of like gamers, I think, tend to just get Web3 because they're used to in-game currency, right? They're used to kind of like these new mechanics and learning and kind of like learning new tools and learning new UIs. So I think their ability to pick it up is a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And so kind of the catalyst for it was like we started to realize that let's talk to a bunch of different gamers and game developers and see what the current state is, because you probably hear a lot about Web3 gaming. People, from the Web2 gaming standpoint are like, this is a scam, like blockchain's bad for ESG, like we shouldn't support it. They're also just very distrusting of traditional game studios, being like, this is just a new way to scam money out from us. So we realized like there's a lot of negativity around this. Like, let's unpack that. Let's add some nuance, right? And we realized a lot of that was because there's like these large incumbents who are controlling how games are developed.
Right.
And we talked to game developers and players, and I kind of already told you the grievances from the players. They're just like unhappy because like the system's just taking money, more and more money out of them.
Well, it feels like that in non-Web3 games. It feels like this constant flow of, I mean, I have a 16-year-old. It's a constant flow of charges on my card. You know what I mean? And it's like crazy.
Well, I think the worst thing is like we talked to the game developers as well, and they hate that. They're like, I just want to like build a fun game. Right. And so we were super surprised because we were like, okay, maybe there's a misbalance, right? People like making a bunch of money. Like, no, game developers love making fun games, and they hate this like free to play, and all these different like iterations where it's just extracting more and more money. Right. And so for us, we were like, with 2 billion gamers around the world, this is not a niche, this is a nation. Like, I think it's very well suited for a DAO, because a DAO is really optimizing for that community management, community engagement, community participation. And so we were quite excited by saying, hey, let's create a DAO to basically have the next iteration of gaming be community owned, rather than just be a copy paste of the same incumbents who are just owning and extracting money out of it like over and again. It's very against the Web3 ethos.
So designers, developers, and gamers in Game7?
So we kind of refer to it as like Game7 Nation. We had this like recent push, where we have this like avatar, right, and you can kind of go through it. Like, won't go down the rabbit hole. We can probably talk about that later. But like I mentioned before, 2 billion people. Like this is a nation, and I think it's really going to take people from all walks of life, all experience, like very diverse kind of like individuals to make this happen. And so we're very welcoming of everybody. I think first and foremost, we're giving a lot of support to developers because there's still a lot of gaps that need to be filled there. But everyone's welcome to Game7. There's a lot of people who like playing games, and there's a wide variety of games that we play.
How are people getting engaged with Game7? Is this a situation where people are buying an NFT to become a member, or what's the process?
Yeah, so like when we first started, it was like, okay, let's start with Discord, and it's like I've been a member of quite a few different DAOs, and like that's always a call to action, and that's actually why we incubated and we're launching the waitlist for this new product we called Summon. Okay. As we realized that everyone's so hyped about DAOs, and I'm very hyped about DAOs, but the actual experience when somebody gets into it is brutal. Got to come to Discourse. There's 5,000 people there. I want to help. I don't know how. Maybe I reach out to somebody. Wait, where do you do proposals? How do you vote? Like, that's even if you know that proposals are the main way that things happen, right? And so, like, there's so much context. And so we were like, what would be a product that would help kind of unify that? Nice. And I think it was kind of a light bulb moment when we were like, this is a gaming DAO. Being a member should be a game. Mm-hmm. So we built this Summon product where we have this on-chain soulbound NFT. We have on-chain crafting system and inventory system where you do different tasks and quests and achievements. You get different trophies, and then like those different items you can actually equip on your avatar. And so like you can also craft different materials into different items, and it's kind of a cool experience because as you progress and you help and you engage with the community, you can actually visually see yourself kind of like increase in stature.
Nice. That's very cool.
Yeah. So,
now, is that a platform you guys are making available to other people that are launching DAOs?
So vast majority of it is going to be open source. So we already open sourced the inventory system. I believe we might have open sourced the crafting system, but we're just kind of putting final polish on all of that. So there's a lot of smart contracts that went on the back end to support that. We're probably going to have some of the dashboards maybe and analytics and like some like traditional SaaS like model just like help support the team who's going to continue to develop and iterate. Because I think like as a pre-alpha, this is pretty good. Yeah. But I'm not super OG into DAOs, but like in the last year and a half, I think like I have a lot of grievances and a lot of things that I would like to see resolved. Yeah. So
I can give you a list.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like I'm really excited to keep continuing, kind of iterating and solving solutions for DAOs. Yeah.
That's really cool. I love that. I love that your first product out of this DAO was that, and that it's a platform that can help. Because I think, frankly, the gamification of it would help any DAO. Yeah. If it's not Discord, it's already, leaps and bounds above the normal
Yeah.
experience.
One of the things that a couple of the companies we've been involved with, it's that early whale problem, where all of a sudden people are at the top controlling everything, but they're not contributing.
Yeah.
And that's what I was really turned on by your stuff at Summon, was that, you have to maintain those positions, you have to do things, and you have to earn XP basically to stay there. But you could also, I presume, be a smaller player that builds yourself up over time, and just like people come out of the communities on Telegram to run companies, and then get roles like that. And to me, that really sunk into my head, because I was like, well, that is another way to solve this problem that I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Well, I think because it's kind of like this dual part for the initial alpha, right? It was this community live ops, which I kind of went into, where it's like how to direct and organize and coordinate a community more effectively, I think.
Right.
But the governance piece you mentioned, I think, is very powerful as well, because the whole idea around it is like we want Game7 to be meritocratic, but how do you do that unless you can track contributions in like a granular way? And what's kind of interesting is like when I think of communities, there's like kind of a spectrum of how they want to organize their community. On like the far end is what you mentioned, where it's like $1, 1 token, 1 vote. Whatever money you put in is what I care about. But those early entrants, when the token's cheap or the contribution's cheap, hopefully they're going to last for the next 5 years, but very often not, right?
Yeah, right.
And the other end is like people who only care about the contribution, don't really care about the economic token. I think that Summon, basically with the soulbound NFT, allows you to be anywhere on that spectrum.
Nice.
Because what you can say is either, hey, I'm only voting with the soulbound token based on my level, or I'm maybe using it as a multiplier for my base token. So I think it's actually a very elegant solution. If you already launched a DAO, your token's super misaligned, you could say, hey, maybe I want a 50x multiplier on people who are engaged. And you can start to bring that back over to where it's like the active engaged people have more of a say and can actually help shape the DAO more.
That's great. I didn't even think of that.
I'm really excited to see how people start
really
to use
neat.
it.
I like that. So in terms of kind of producing games out of the system, what have you guys nailed down kind of the process you think it's going to be for how that happens? Do you have active games in development now? What's the idea?
Yeah, so I think there's a full spectrum of things that need to happen. And what was kind of interesting was like, we mentioned like, hey, we want this grassroots movement, we want this kind of like, community run, community led, meritocratic, like all these things. And we were like, our motto is, listen, then act. And so one of the first things that we did was we're like, let's do a game dev report, because crypto is super noisy, as you all know, that everyone's saying different things that sometimes conflict, right? And a lot of these people who are new entrants or just want to build a game are like, where do I go? Everyone's telling me this sucks and this is great, and then the next person says the complete opposite, right?
Right.
So we did a game dev report. We actually talked to 100 game developers in every different ecosystem, and we put together this really cohesive report being like, here are the gaps that currently need to be filled, or here are the things that could be improved. We tried to be very neutral about it, like, some things like needed to be improved, some so anyway, like we tried to be just very fair about it. And what was great is that's like really driven a lot of our investment mandate.
Nice.
It's also driven like the grants that we're allocating, and then the places where those gaps haven't been filled by those two, we have community members who've taken up kind of like the mantle of like building that.
Nice.
And so that's where Summon came about, is we heard all these game developers saying, hey, I know how to build games, but I don't want to manage a community.
Yeah.
I have a Discord, but like I have a token now, right? And then the other one would be Hyperplay. We heard that people were like, we need a Web3 native game launcher. Distribution is a huge problem for us, and then also the user experience of wallets, where I'm immersed in the game, and then all of a sudden MetaMask or something pops up, and I have to click accept 50 times during an hour of gameplay. Like,
that's nuts.
It's not an immersive experience, right?
Right.
So those are a couple products we're incubating. So a lot of that is kind of like more of this infra. I think we've invested in some like fantastic games we're going to be announcing a little bit later, like that first kind of batch that we've invested in. But yeah, very
cool. What's it called again?
Hyperplay.
Hyperplay is like a Steam for Web3.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it abstracts away the need to have your wallet for every interaction within the games.
Yeah, I would say, because like comparing to Steam, they're very it's one of their talking points is that they're not Steam, because Steam is a very closed ecosystem.
Right,
it's like
right.
You can only be on Steam.
Of course.
So it's very much taking the Web3 approach of being like, bring your own wallet, and kind of flexible on what wallet you use. It's also like connected to a bunch of different game stores, and then you can permissionlessly upload your game and get that kind of overlay and that nice user experience. So
that's nice.
So it's the Web3 version of Steam.
Right. The Web3 open ecosystem version. Right.
Yeah.
In terms of how this whole thing was funded, was this all funded by members of DAOs? Did you guys raise money for this? How did you set this up?
Yeah, so we I've been pretty involved in the BitDAO ecosystem, and this was one of the first proposals that I thought was like kind of a cool idea. And so majority of the funding came from BitDAO and Forte.
Nice.
And so it was like, BitDAO I think has like a fantastic kind of ecosystem and a lot of like a lot of kind of like benefit and like really interested in funding this. And then I think Forte has amazing domain expertise in gaming.
Sure.
And so it was like I think a perfect match. And then we just kind of like built this small kind of like community around it, and we were like, okay, what does the structure look like? Wrote a couple proposals, like got the initial tranche of funding, and now through opening the Discord and then Summon is really kind of this like opening it up moment. I'm pretty excited about the trajectory.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what's the flow of a game into Game7, right? Does the idea come within? Can the ideas come from without? And then how does it get developed? Is there like a sub-DAO that manages every game, or is it separate project management? What's kind of the basic concept?
Yeah, so I think it's fairly free form. I don't think there's like necessarily this kind of like in or out, right? Like it's like people who like literally have like been in the booth today. It's like they could easily be part of the Game7 ecosystem.
Nice.
I think that's what's been fantastic is like just using Summon, because that's kind of the one I have most experience with. Is like I had all these grievances, like we mentioned, of DAOs, and I was like, okay, I had this kind of idea, and then like I ended up meeting Josh, who's part of Game7, and Steve, who were like the two other kind of co-founders of this, and like we were just like whiteboarding and kind of like discussing, had a couple calls, and then we got a grant from Game7. We started hiring a couple developers, and then in the last like 3 months, we've just like built this initial alpha product. And so I think that's really the beauty of a DAO, is that if you have a very engaged community who's helpful and is all kind of aligned and passionate about a similar thing, things just to start to spontaneously come together.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. So this is pretty new. What kind of, are you at a stage where you have games that you're considering that you guys are that people are starting on? Where do you stand with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like there's been so much capital and interest flowing into gaming. Having been in the
gaming
investment
and
space,
infrastructure in a bear market.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like so I think that you kind of look at this next iteration of like NFTs. For me, it was funny. Like I started in like more like ZK and cryptography, and trying to explain that to my parents or anyone else, they were like,
"Forget it."
Cool, sounds neat, right? I think it's still very useful. Honey. It's very relevant now, but back in the day, people were like,
"We're proud of you, son."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, doing great, So like those turned out to be pretty good investments, but they didn't catch on, right? Whereas NFTs, it's so much more approachable.
Yeah.
Because it's so much easier to me to be like, hey, do you collect things?
Right.
Like, do you like art? Like all of these things that a much larger audience could be interested in, just immediately get, as opposed to explaining the game theory and the cryptography that like underpins it, right?
Sure.
So I think like the next iteration of that is gaming, right? Like I think NFTs kind of had this like huge hype cycle. I think there's still something there.
Yeah.
But NFTs as they relate to gaming, and kind of gaming is a massive, like I mentioned, like over 2 billion people in the world playing. So I think that this next cycle, gaming is going to be like do extremely well. But yeah, games. We've been talking with a lot of different game studios. I'm pretty excited about things being built.
Nice.
Because I think like in Web3, people expect things to be launched like next month.
Yeah.
But then if you look at the normal AAA game cycle, it's like 3 years development, right? And like massive amount of money, and people are trying to be like, why are we only having these clones of like really simple games? And it's like, because it requires a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a guy I interviewed a guy that I know that's building a game, trying to do a AAA level game, and I'm like, well, what's it going to cost you? And he's like, oh, I'm expecting 25, 30 million.
Yeah.
And years, right? And it's like, you get everybody excited about this thing is coming, but if you don't have a brand already that you're building on top of, it's really tough to maintain that level of excitement. So
100%.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So what do you think of like the people coming to the booth? I mean, because they're probably pitching ideas. I think I heard you say to you about games. What do you think like the next kind of cool games, or what kind of genre do you think to be, or what do you think's exciting that everybody wants to play?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it's like, I think that's what I love about gaming is just like such a diverse like amount, like a diverse kind of like group, right? Where it's like, we have people who are super passionate about fashion games, right? Like when they heard Summon, they're like, look at all these items I can equip, and like like the fashion, they're super passionate about it, right? And like I kind of maybe heard of it, but I didn't really know those games existed. But there's hundreds of thousands of people who play these kind of games,
fashion
right?
games.
Yeah,
Wow.
And then just like, but not to say that that's what I think is going to be the next big boom, right? But it's like, I think there's like the hardcore games, you have like your first person shooters, you have your MMOs, like I think that those like will probably be that large kind of aha moment where like one of them makes it. I think that probably like a hardcore game is most likely to do that. But I also think there's like a lot of communities that it's more simplistic game. It's fun. They could have pretty reasonable adoption. Because like in Web3, like 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people, like that's still pretty significant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's pales in comparison to where we're going, right?
So kind of like the way Zynga did it with like Farmville and the other ones. The kind of
casual game.
Yeah. No, I think that it's, I mean, you said the fashion. I was thinking about our friend at Digital Axe, Emma, and their fashion NFTs, and thinking how they could be deployed in a game. Too.
Well, I think that's part of their model is that they want it to be deployable for any kind of thing. I think you're right.
But more importantly, anybody who has a teenage daughter knows that they're playing fashion games on the phone.
The other day,
really interesting.
The other day, I tallied up my wife's total expenditures over the last 10 years on Candy Crush, and she just fell over it. She's like, "But it's only $2 like a time.
Free to play. It's free to play."
Yeah, I was like, "This is how much you've spent." That's a European trip.
Yeah. It's crazy how it adds up, right?
It is. It's amazing. It's funny. We were talking about the fashion games too. My daughter, she's 14 now, but that whole Roblox ecosystem of collecting, like, I mean, these aren't even games, right? And they're not even like social. They do it with their friends, but they're just avidly, addictively collecting stuff, and somebody's making a lot of money on it. It's funny. On Sunday I judged the Kanto hackathon, and what I noticed was all of the games were not, first-person shooters or anything graphically intensive. Right? There was one kind of VR-ish, AR-ish like game that was one. They had one demo room built, but the rest of them are like Risk clones, that kind of thing. And I think that's because that's faster to market, right? They all kind of think, okay, I want to create a game. What's the fastest thing I can do if I have a grid and everything's the same? That's a lot easier to do. So I wonder if you're going to see a lot of that at first, or if you guys are going to bite off a big one and do like, something large.
I think it's a blend, right? Because like all of these games are popular in their own right?
Yeah,
like
of course.
People like these easier, more casual games. Some people like the more hardcore games, right? Like there's a market for both of these, but I think the cycles, right, are completely different. Like we mentioned before, like a proper AAA game, it's like $20-30 million, 3 years, like you can't invest in all that,
right?
Or you're literally gonna have 0 data points for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So I think having a distribution between like infra, kind of like the lot of gaps that need to be filled to support these games, but not necessarily being too heavy in that too, because I think crypto tends to be like, let's build all this really super great infra, but then you need to focus on product. I think that like this kind of end of this last cycle and this like next cycle, like it's really focused on, okay, we have a decent underpinnings to get to like more mass market. So I think that should be the focus, is like, not having play to earn, but having like fun to play.
That's wow, what a novel idea.
Right? It's like crazy, and so like I think that's a lot of these. It's been interesting that a lot of these blockchain games haven't actually been marketing themselves as blockchain games. They kind of abstract all of that away.
Well, they're afraid. They think everybody's.
Well, it's more so that
in the
they've abstracted away the complexity, and it's like well, there's a couple pieces. Like one, I've heard that if you market it as a blockchain game, you get a lot of the people who are just kind of farmers. So you have more of the takers as opposed to the players.
Makes sense.
But then the other piece too is like, if you have a fun game, that's already a big market.
Right.
But if you start to be like, hey, I'm marketing just as a Web3 hardcore product, then it's like, okay, well, like that's your market as well.
Yourself,
And so I really think it's this like blockchain will be an important part of the next iteration of gaming, but it's also not going to be something that's super in your face where it's like, hey, like here's your wallet, and here's your like NFT, and like you have to buy ETH. It's like abstract a lot of that away and make it fun to play, and I think that's how we get this massive adoption.
Like infrastructure, like electricity in the walls or plumbing. When they built it, everybody's like, oh my god, it's going to be how long is it going to take to do that? And now nobody even thinks about it. It's just there. Or even wireless, a more recent example. And everybody was trying to figure out how to do the last mile from. It was the power companies, the cable companies, and the phone companies trying to get from that tower to the house. And then wireless pops up, and all of a sudden, it's all gone. But it's just buried. You don't even think about it anymore. It just happens. So I think that's interesting, because now people will buy the game or play the game because of the experience, because they want to, versus somebody going, oh, I want to support Web3, so let's go buy this game and do it. It moves all that like kind of complicated stuff that we talk about, wallets, RPCs, everything in there that takes a while to figure out if you haven't done it before, and it makes it just so it's not even there. And that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
I didn't think of it that way. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, I think there's like closer parallels to, like, I like the electricity example, right, where it's like ubiquitous, right? I think that's what we're gonna get. But even in gaming, like talking to a lot of the OG kind of gamers, like people who are like in the free to play or the mobile space, like this took like a decade to come about. Like they would go to these large game conferences and people would be like, they were like pariahs. They were like, not a real game, mobile like sucks,
really?
Like get out of here, like
wow.
like free to play. Like people are just like very like negative toward it. And I think it's interesting about the gaming community is like it's quite tribal. Like if it's kind of this new shift that a lot of gamers don't like shifts. And so like that was the most interesting thing to me is like this blockchain kind of shift is not unique. and that this has happened multiple times with multiple kind of game iterations. So it was kind of interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, and there will be a group that says, okay, I want to do the cool thing now. Let me make this the cool thing because I'm not the cool guys, the OGs on the original one. That's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Is there a game you want to see?
A game I want to see.
You personally, like a type of game or something you would love to see come out of Game 7?
I mean, I'm like a huge MMO fan.
Nice.
I think like the social element of it and like just kind of the free world, open world kind of stuff. I would love to see like a fantastic MMO. I think like a lot of the inspiration behind Summon is like, I think that, you know, if we're making a gamified community kind of like tool, I think that an MMO like model is very good because
Nice.
like you have those guilds there, right? You know, you have to like manage kind of like your team, right, or like whatever. Yeah. So like, anyway, long story short, I'd love to see an MMO.
That's cool.
You know, it was kind of interesting when you said that. We're always talking about communities, like Telegram communities and things like that. It would be really interesting if somehow you could merge in the kind of gaming MMO side with, say, communities that are built in Discord and Telegram, and somehow make it to where instead of looking at a line of text, you know, you're actually in some kind of a world doing, you know, guild activities, MMO activities around community development.
Yeah.
You know, something like that.
That'd be cool if Summon actually ended up being a game besides being a community platform.
I'll tell you one thing is that all of the avatars are game ready, but that's as far as I will go.
Very nice. Well,
yeah.
then, I mean, look, if you do it this way, I mean, if you have this core of Summon as the community builder, right, then theoretically, teams coming in could build to interact with that, right? If you're building a community of players and developers and designers, but if players start saying, "Oh, this is cool, I want to be a part of this," now you've got the potential to have a core functionality for utilizing that. It's kind of like what were the NFTs called that were just text in-game items? Loot. Yeah. It's kind of like that, but you actually have.
I love the loot community. I mean, I think it was still is a fantastic community.
Really, I haven't dabbed in there.
I have a lot of divine robes that I don't want to talk about them. Yeah, but I mean, I think like for me, it's kind of cool like instantiating this system first with Game 7. I would love to see other communities start to adopt it as part of this kind of like standardization like process. But I think what's kind of cool is that because we have these different gear items and collections, like we made a special collection just for ETH Denver for people who sign up at the booth that they're going to get like basically that in their inventory.
Oh, very cool.
What we can start to do is say, hey, like because we have this huge community of gamers and designers and everything else that, you know, say we want to partner with another game and they're like, you know, if this person does this thing in my community, maybe you can reward them in yours, right? And kind of vice versa.
Nice.
And so if you start to see Game 7 at this hub that's helping get distribution and user acquisition and start to like, you know, support communities that we think are like aligned and like helpful, it starts to connect the dots.
That's
I think
awesome.
it's kind of cool.
That's awesome.
So how about does Game 7 have a token and thing? I mean, how do you do? Because I had a client a couple years ago. I don't know if you've heard of them, Pocket Full of Quarters, but they got a no action letter for a token, a utility token. They're one of the few, and their whole idea was about, you know, being able to move in-game rewards to other franchises, and you know, but mainly the big studio level games, which of course they don't want anybody to do that. I'm curious, within the Game 7 ecosystem, it sounds like you have that portability of like goods and things like that, or capabilities and skills across all the games in the ecosystem, right?
Well, so every achievement and item that you have is soulbound. So it takes away a lot of that complexity where it's like these things won't be traded.
Yeah, so it's just there.
Yeah.
There's
So,
no
like,
marketplace.
Because like we have this 3-phase approach where it's basically like the bootstrapping phase. We have these committees, right? We like try to take a lot of information from the community to help define it, but at the end of the day, it's committees and like super suboptimal. It's not where we want to be. The next phase is where a community is run. You have this meritocratic system of voting, and then you still have a veto for the committee. And then the third one is just, hey, the community just runs it. Hopefully the system that you set up is good and battle tested.
Right.
And so we're like, okay, Summon is that first step toward getting that meritocratic data points to actually define this system. And so like I think as far as like a token, like no discussion for that. I think like that soulbound NFT is like that first very important step. And now we can start to refine like what's the optimal weight. Like, do we still have committees? Is it just a straight vote? Like, is it like a linear kind of like vote weight? Is it kind of like exponential? Like, I think there's a lot of fun stuff we can play around with to get from that phase 2 to phase 3.
Nice.
But I'm pretty excited that we're making pretty quick progress to that phase 2, where we want to be.
That's awesome.
And I really like, from a community perspective, soulbound tokens and the items being associated to the soulbound token, no marketplace. It makes people know who's done what. Building that meritocracy up, I think that makes a ton of sense. That's really
rather than just buying it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
that's cool.
Well, what we heard from a lot of game companies is they're actively doing these airdrops to like communities, and they were like, if there was a way that we could be like, hey, well maybe if you do this certain quest or task, maybe you would get access to something, right? Or like, maybe if we knew that they were actively contributing like every day or week or month, then they're like, we could do these airdrops. And so like, it's kind of interesting that I didn't really realize from a game's perspective, they're just really trying to get that distribution. Like I think with the IDFA ban, like user acquisition, it's been really challenging for a lot of games, and so they're looking for like better models. And I think having a robust community, like I was surprised at kind of like how interesting that was to them.
That's interesting. Well, and I think the soulbound tokens then become potentially identities for other game platforms. They become so much more that you can unlock around that. That's really cool.
It's funny because it's like, I've very purposefully been like, I don't want this to be an identity problem. Like, because like, it's funny, like, since like, there was like Sovereign back in like 2017, like, I was using ZK back then, like for like attestation, so like claims and stuff. Like, I've been obsessed with the identity thing, but like, that trail is like littered with bodies of people who failed.
Of course. And
so for me, I'm like, I would love to see kind of this standard for soulbound NFTs and progress and this kind of on-chain resume, but I don't want to push that
organically.
Just let it happen, They bootstrap this web of trust.
Yeah.
If you start to predicate it and be like, this is going to be your on-chain resume, people are going to game it, they're going to abuse it. Like, have a healthy, robust community that people actually care about their standing. Then you can start to leverage that.
Exactly.
And so it's like,
don't
put the cart before the horse.
I think that's a really smart. Don't purposely build it as that, but let it turn into that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's really smart. And I think it will. And I think then there's all kinds of cool things that can happen from there, right?
Yep.
There's bundles of capabilities. There's just, it sounds really smart. That's good.
Thanks.
That's great.
Well, then it becomes community driven, and it's then it's like anytime when you're like trying to put ideas in other people's heads, you're planting seeds, trying to wait for them to connect the dots, and then it's their idea, and you lay that out there like breadcrumbs for everybody to follow, and then eventually they'll come together and be like, oh, let's do this, and they go and do it, and then it's inherent in their like kind of, I don't know, daily mantra or the daily life thing to do that versus, like you said, if you give it to them or tell them about it, then everybody starts gamified and try to figure out how do we do this or do that, how do we get advantage or get alpha for ourselves versus for the community. So that's super cool.
All right, so how do people, first of all, what kind of folks are you looking for to get engaged in the community right now? And then how do they go about doing that? Where do they find you?
Yeah, that's what I said. It's like super broad. Like if you have an interest or you're passionate about gaming, if you're like also a developer who like, is intersecting with gaming, either building infra or kind of gaming, like if any of those kind of matches you or all of them match you, like we would love to have you in the community.
Cool.
So, you're free to join the Discord. Also, the waitlist went live yesterday for the Summon product.
Okay.
And so we're like, it's closed out for right now. I think like, I'm very impressed the rate that we built it.
Nice.
So, we're continuing to kind of iterate and evolve, and we're looking forward to getting community feedback on how to like make the product better.
Cool.
Like the plan is like, we set this framework for it. Now we want the community to continue to iterate on it. Like we're not trying to define it. Yeah.
What's his website? Where do people go?
Yeah, so it's game7.io.
Okay.
Would be like a good place to start.
Great.
And then I'll have the wait list on there. I'd have the link to the Discord, kind of like
Perfect.
Yeah.
John, thanks so much, man. This was fascinating.
Awesome,
really cool. I'm
Yeah.
excied. I'm going to keep an eye on you guys.
Amazing.
you.
Yeah,
It's great,
thank you so much
man.
for the
Thank
time.
Nice to meet you, man.
Appreciate it.
Take care.